Hello, and welcome to our continued study of the French Revolution. Today we're going to continue looking at the Reign of Terror. Okay, in particular, how some of the events that occur in the year 1793. So if you just look at the screen, you can see there to the left, we have a sans-culotte holding up Louis's head. Whether or not that happened is another matter. We do know Louis's head was held up. There are many depictions of this after the 100,000 or so people that did attend his execution. And we have a quote from Danton, who is pictured kind of in the middle there. He says, "The kings of Europe would dare challenge us, we throw them the head of the king." Today we're also going to look at the top right. You can see there Marat. He is very significant in 1793. And the bad boy to the bottom right is Jacques. My French pronunciation is awful, you know that. I do apologise again in advance. Natasha in particular, always laughing at me. But known as the Red Priest. So a couple of significant people. Now, just to recap, the start of the Terror, there's four events that some consider the start of the Terror. The execution of Louis XVI, which happens January 21st, we've already been over. So the other three events we're going to cover today, which is the formation of the Revolutionary Tribunal, the political terror, which occurs starting with the expulsion of the Girondin deputies from the convention, which is in June. And then, of course, there's the murder of Marat, who, by Charlotte Corday, we'll have a look at. Once that happens, the terror actually increases quite significantly as well. By now, I'm hoping that when I'm talking, you're with me and you understand, and you'd be able to answer this question: what events and conditions brought about, rather, the introduction of the reign of terror? The first of those, of course, being war. Okay. At any rate, a couple of other people we want to have a look at. Dumouriez is, of course, a French military hero, or at least he is, in 1792. And famously, he left the National Convention, went off, stopped politics, went off, led the army, the invading Prussian army, and was able to lead them, of course, to their first victory, the Battle of Valmy, okay, where he outmaneuvered the Prussian generals, the seemingly all-powerful and unstoppable Prussian generals at that point in time. Not only did he stop them at Valmy just before it was looking as though Paris would be overrun, but he actually made sure that foreign troops were off French soil within about 2 weeks. A revolutionary hero, however. Okay, start of 1793, we see that he starts to change his mind. Okay, he invades Holland, so I can't go into too much. The French claim territory in Holland, etc. But he is defeated by the Austrians in March, okay, mid to late March. He signs an armistice with them, so to stop fighting, and he actually decides that he is going to turn around, march with his army on the National Convention in Paris, who he now believes have gone too far, okay? So he thinks the National Convention, which succeeded the Legislative Assembly, which was obviously full of more radical people. Okay, they're all revolutionaries. I don't want to say all of a sudden they're revolutionaries. They replaced other revolutionaries, but they were generally more radical in their thinking. Okay, and Dumouriez, along with many others, did not like the direction, particularly of the Parisian-based group, the Jacobins, okay, were taking the revolution. And he was supported heavily by the Girondins. And once he defects, this really discredits those that had supported him, because he is now seen as a traitor. And those back in Paris, such as Brissot and the Girondins, they are going to be in a lot of trouble because they had supported Dumouriez, okay? He had supported them, and it has consequences, resonating consequences. Another person we need to look at is Marat. So during this time, he has many professions, initially a doctor, but at this point in time, he's a radical journalist and a bit of a shit stirrer. Of course, you know what that means. But during this time, he's responsible for his radical newspaper, The Friend of the People. Initially, he's against war. Okay, but again, he supports it, just like Danton and I suppose Robespierre and many of the others that see it as a way to gain patriotic support. Okay. He advocates a temporary dictatorship to deal with the crisis of war. Okay, so we've seen that, during war times, people can call. We've discussed a martial law. Okay, because of extraordinary circumstances. which is very interesting because we think about some of the aims of the revolution about the rights and individual rights and how people were very much against Louis when he was throwing people in jail arbitrarily without proper tribunals, etc. But again, during this kind of radical period, 1792 and then now 1793, he becomes one of the most prominent members of the convention. He's also well supported in the streets, so he has public support. Okay, and in politics, his voice is prominent. His articles are full of vermin. Okay, this vitriol, the tone of vitriol, where he heavily criticises the monarchy and supporters of the monarchy. The Girondins are very much criticised by Marat. We do know that the events of 1792, okay, the two journées, okay, were very much encouraged by his newspaper and people reading it and reading to others some of his ideas. He did encourage the September massacres. Okay, we can't say how he's responsible for them, but he very much encouraged the sans-culottes, the radical sans-culottes, to purge enemies. Okay, he's accused of this crime. He never fully denies it. Okay, and the Girondins, who initially have a little bit of power, but we see it begins to shift. Okay, they accuse him of being radical, and they demand that he's put on trial. Danton agrees that Marat is put on trial. He's put on trial before the Revolutionary Tribunal. Of course, he's acquitted. Okay, and his acquittal is celebrated once someone is free. That kind of like semi a martyr. He literally does become a martyr later on, according to a revolutionary martyr. But once he's acquitted, that's kind of like the turning point. The Girondins kind of have their little fall from power, and we see the rise of the Mountain and the Jacobins. Okay, moving along. So there is Marat. He's been acquitted. He's carried by his loyal supporters on the street. Okay, and we see the tides beginning to turn. The tide turns, of course, against the group known as the Girondins, who are very have a lot of support in the provinces. Now, let's not forget that the majority of France's population live outside Paris. It's sometimes people overlook that, okay, or seem to forget it because of all these events that are occurring within Paris. And the group that support the Girondins are the Federalists. Now, the Federalist means not to have a centralised power, not to have a power in one place, in this instance in Paris. And this group becomes very prominent, and they start to become very skeptical of the direction of the revolution, particularly after the royalists lose their power and the fall of the monarchy at the hands largely of the sans-culottes, particularly with the journés. And they begin to revolt. So this, how do we clarify this in the in terms of like trying to find a definition? Can we call it counter-revolution? I'm not too sure you can. Okay, it is definitely not part of the Revolutionary War against other countries, the international war. Okay, but there are revolts. Okay, so we classify it as the Federalist Revolt. Okay, and one of the most significant figures of this Federalist Revolt is, of course, well, not Brissot, but Charlotte Corday. Okay, who we're going to see in a minute. Is very angered at what happens, particularly when, after the defection of Dumouriez, after Marat is acquitted, after they're seemingly losing power, Brissot and the Girondins, okay, there's a bit of a power struggle between them and the Jacobins. The Jacobins win, and the people, the sans-culottes, as we'll see a little bit later on, they actually march and demand on the streets that the Girondins are arrested. They are eventually arrested, many of them, including Brissot, Madame Roland, okay, the Duc de Lyon, who did many wonderful things prior to the revolution, are actually guillotined. Okay, they're executed. And this, of course, upsets many, okay, outside Paris, and some within Paris. Let's not beat around the bush as well, including Charlotte Corday. Okay, she's inspired. She goes to listen to this Federalist movement, okay, by Barbaroux, about he was one of the Girondin refugees. She goes to solicit a meeting with Marat. Okay, she promises him the name of all these kind of counter-revolutionaries. Okay, all these Federalists that are against what Marat stands for. He's in his bath. She draws out a knife, stabs him in the chest. There's many famous images of this. She's arrested on the spot and charged and executed herself. Okay, I think it's very interesting. Just want to point out that as she's on the scaffold to where she's going to be executed, then you've got the fish women, others almost tearing her to pieces. There's so much violence, so much vitriol, this hatred at this point in time. Okay, it's alleged that the horsemen around her had to gallop with their swords, the sabers lifted up to make sure that she actually made it to the scaffolding. Okay. Again, of course, we've got the economic terror as well. This group is called the Enrage, okay, and they're arguing about the right to a living, okay. This, of course, is Jacques Reux, otherwise known as the Red Priest. Now, this group, the Enraged, are very upset about the fact that in the revolution, okay, they're still struggling with the necessities of life in terms of finding food, and of course, again, who's to blame for this? The hoarders, those that they believe are holding out on food, okay, to make profit, okay, and they're making profit when people are starving or are really struggling to survive. These hoarders are making profit, and or it's believed, or they're scapegoated, it's believed, and the Enraged really encouraged a couple of laws to come into effect. Okay, the first is the law of the maximum. Okay, and that controls pretty much the price of basic foods. It's expanded later on in the year to include pretty much all food, and it's almost like an early version, I suppose, of pre-Marxism. So pre-Marxist Marxism, I meant to say. Okay, where food and the price of food is controlled. This video will continue in a second part in a minute, where we'll go through the year 1793. Okay, but with the Enrage, I just want to suggest that they're extremely radical. Okay, again, there's not one. It's not like a political club. There's no party like the Jacobins. Okay, or they're not necessarily represented within the convention at this point in time. Okay, but they do get together and campaign against, of course, the high cost of living, I imagine. Okay, something we still face today. Again, they encourage a crackdown on anyone suspected of being of hoarding. Okay, his most famous speech is in June of 1793, dubbed the Manifesto of the Enraged, where he talks about the bloodsuckers of the people. Again, we'll continue looking at 1793 and the Reign of Terror in part 2.